welcome you to today's WU Matters, WU Talks public lecture on responsible leadership during the Corona crisis. My name is Tatjana Opitz. I am the Vice Rector for Infrastructure and Digitalization here at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. As part of the WU Matters, WU Talks, a series of unique panel discussions and lectures, WU has created a platform which facilitates the sharing of knowledge and insights between academia and public. The objective is to address economic and social issues, thus contributing to accountable economic action to help solve economic, social, ecological challenges. So we have scientists, researchers, and experts from the corporate world as well as from public institutions sharing their expertise on current issues with an interested public. I guess that tonight's topic is very intriguing. Although most of us are unfortunately still in the depths of the crisis and there is a lot of uncertainty, what we for sure know that at some point it will end. Defeating the virus requires an unprecedented degree of global solidarity and universally shared dedication to pursuing the greater good at the expense of the comfort and convenience of the individual. So we have seen over the past months best practices from all social strata demonstrating unsurpassed leadership, and we have seen, unfortunately, decision makers fail miserably. In all these cases, ladies and gentlemen, there are important lessons learned. So today's discussion is a great opportunity to discuss what leadership in a crisis really means, and then to identify best practices to help us be better prepared for future crises, although we all hope that we won't be running into a similar crisis, but we want to be better prepared, and also an opportunity and a chance to celebrate the many everyday leaders who emerged from the crisis and demonstrated responsible leadership. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank WU's Competence Center for Sustainability, Transformation and Responsibility, called STAR, great name, and of course their associates for organizing today's public lecture. STAR, by the way, is not part of an academic program or department. STAR's mission is to support WU's social responsibility as a driver for sustainable transformation. It serves as a platform for networking, knowledge exchange and transfer, external engagement, and of course, dissemination of exemplary scholarship on all aspects related to environmental, social, and of course, economic sustainability. STAR hosts academic and public events, provides online space for sharing relevant content, and liaises the WU community with external stakeholders. Moreover, I would like to thank and introduce Milda Zelenskaite. I hope, Milda, I pronounced your name correctly. She is manager and senior scientist at STAR. Milda will be our host for today's event. Then I would like to introduce Günther Stahl. Günther Stahl is professor of international management and director of the Center for Sustainability, Transformation and Responsibility at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. And he will give us tonight's keynote speech. Last but not least, a very warm welcome to our 5 distinguished guests and panelists, unfortunately on our virtual panel, who will be debating about responsible leadership during the pandemic. I'm sure that our panelists will share many valuable insights with us tonight. So thank you very much for joining us. and enjoy the discussion. And I give back to Milda. Thank you.
Thank you very much for such a kind introduction. So hello and welcome on behalf of our whole team at STAR. Yes, my name is Milda and I will be moderating tonight's event. Now, whether you're tuning in now for live stream or will be watching us later, thank you for joining us. This has not been an easy year for anybody. Here in Austria, same as in many other countries around the planet, it seems we're heading into a rather unusual holiday season. And, in fact, at this very moment behind my office wall, there are people lining up for COVID mass testing. So I think it's fair to say we could all use a little bit inspiration. And therefore, we decided to have a conversation today about responsible leadership with a very diverse group, in our opinion, inspiring individuals. So Karin Apyarova, Marketing Director at Oracle, Alpaslan Deliloglu, CEO and CSO at IKEA Austria, Wolfgang Höppler, a medical doctor here in Vienna, who may need to jump from his seat and run to the ward at any moment because he's on duty right now, Marta Krumpek from the Extinction Rebellion movement, and an executive coach, Lars Meidel. So I will repeat their names and give a little bit more of introduction later on. But before I do that, I'll hand over to Professor Günther Stahl, who, as Tatjana mentioned, is also co-director of our center, and he'll be opening our discussion with a keynote. So over to you, Günther.
All right. Sorry, I'm still trying to figure out how Zoom works. Now you should be able to see the slides. Do you? Do you see the slides?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening for this WU Matters event. And thanks also to Vice Rector Opitz for the welcoming words and to Dr. Zelenskete for the introduction. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share with you some thoughts and observations on the COVID-19 crisis and responsible leadership. And I'm delighted not only because this is a topic that is close to my research and teaching interests, but also because we have a really impressive group of panelists lined up who represent a range of perspectives and backgrounds, from corporate executives to a medical doctor. And they will share their experiences during the Corona crisis with us, and together we will explore the implications for leadership. Before we give the floor to our panelists, let me take just a few minutes to clarify what we mean by leadership, because leadership is one of those buzzwords, one of those tricky subjects that everyone thinks they know a lot about, but that is actually hard to define. And there are many myths surrounding leadership. Now, one is the notion that leadership is increasingly becoming obsolete and irrelevant in today's world. I teach the leadership module in several executive academy programs, including the professional MBA and the global EMBA programs. And students sometimes ask, how important is leadership really in today's world, the digital age where more and more work is done in virtual teams or self-managed teams? And they sometimes say, I recently read in a book that leadership is becoming extinct as we are moving to more agile, participative ways of working and flat organizations with no hierarchies and no formal leaders. And there are actually management scholars who have argued this way, like Barbara Kellerman, for example, in her book, The End of Leadership. This is, of course, nonsense. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. When students ask me this question, I usually ask them back, well, how many of you actually work in an organization that is completely flat with no hierarchies and no bosses? Very few. companies like Google probably come closest to resembling such a hyper-modern, super flat organization where most of the work is done in self-managed team. But even Google had to learn the hard way that eliminating leadership positions is a sure recipe for disaster, because it inevitably creates a leadership vacuum and chaos. In the early 2000s, the Google founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, were actually wondering whether Google needed any leaders at all. And they were experimenting with a completely flat organization and started to eliminate leadership positions. The experiment lasted only a few weeks until they realized that without leaders, the company would go down the drain in no time, and that leaders are needed throughout the organization at every level. Even in self-managed teams where you have no formal leaders, you need people stepping in and lead and calling the shots, at least occasionally. Now, this is another misconception that people have about leadership. When we think about leadership, we usually think of the larger-than-life leaders who adorn the business magazine covers, or we read about in history books, powerful political leaders or celebrity CEOs like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. But it's important to see that leaders come in many shapes and sizes, and they do not always have formal authority. So what is needed in today's organizations and in today's world, especially in times of crisis, are the type of leader that the Google CEO Sundar Pichai and the HR director Laszlo Bock in a New York Times interview described as emergent leaders or on-the-spot leaders. So people who, regardless of whether they are in a formal leadership role or not, when faced with a challenge or a difficult situation, for example, a crisis situation, step in and lead, but who are also team players and flexible enough and humble enough to step back and let others take the lead if the situation requires it, right? And this emergent kind of leadership, a non-hierarchical leadership, is becoming more and more important for companies. For example, it's critical to the success of self-managed teams. So organizations need leaders. There's very little doubt about that. The world needs leaders too, and now probably more than at any time in recent history. I don't know about you, but to me, it seems that the world is at a tipping point and one crisis is followed by another with barely a moment to breathe in between. Today, we face challenges of huge proportions, economic, political, social, environmental, and we need leaders with the right perspective and purpose. We just have to look at what's been going on in the United States since the election to know that, you know, how important responsible leadership is. And as history has taught us, leadership is most important in times of uncertainty, turbulence, and crisis, like the times in which we live. And this leads us to the topic of today's panel discussion, the COVID-19 crisis and the implication for leadership. Now, when Milda and I had a chat about today's event some time ago, she asked me, has your perspective on responsible leadership changed during the coronavirus crisis? And my answer was, well, actually, I don't recall what exactly I answered, but I think it was yes and no, and not because this is what professors always say if they don't have a good answers. I actually meant it. No, because we've always known that crises tend to bring out the best and the worst in people, right? So it didn't come as a big surprise to me that when the pandemic broke out and the Austrian government decided on a lockdown, I think it was in March, and urged people not to hoard supplies, what many people did was exactly the opposite. They rushed to the supermarkets to grab what they could, food, toilet paper, even though there was no need to. But we also saw amazing examples of people supporting one another and offering their help to neighbors who could do their own shopping and taking care of others. Crises tend to have this polarizing effect on people. Some start acting recklessly or selfishly, so they develop this sense that they need to fend for themselves and become indifferent or even hostile toward others, which may be partly personality driven, but at least to some degree, this is also a normal human reaction in a crisis situation. In a situation where one's basic survival needs are threatened, we switch into survival mode, the so-called flight or fight response. The neocortex, the part of the brain that controls higher order thinking, is impaired or shuts down, and the reptilian brain and limbic system take over, which means that behavior is then more rigidly controlled by basic instincts, the famous 5 Fs. So people may start acting irrationally or selfishly, hoard food, but we've all seen the opposite reaction, acts of kindness and solidarity, and people who took responsibility and stepped in and led through the crisis, and people from all walks of life, right? And I think this is one of the important observations from the coronavirus crisis, this polarizing effect the crisis situations have on people. We could all observe this in our personal and work lives, and also in the political domain, how government leaders responded to the COVID-19 outbreak. So crises reveal the true character of leaders and expose charlatans. And we've seen quite a few of those, but we've also seen positive examples of leaders who demonstrated competence, accountability, and integrity. I'm thinking of leaders like Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, certainly was one of the leaders who stuck out in a positive way, or the Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen. Actually, a strikingly large number of leaders who have been praised for the response to the corona pandemic are women, an observation that made The Guardian wonder whether women make better leaders or crisis managers. So there are these positive examples, but we've all seen plenty of examples of leaders who failed miserably in the handling of the crisis, including top government leaders whose responses to COVID-19 proved shockingly incompetent or negligent, or in some cases even bordered on the bizarre. I'm thinking of authoritarian leaders like Brazil's Bolsonaro, or Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko, who advised his citizens to protect themselves from coronavirus by drinking vodka and going to the sauna to sweat it out, to give an extreme example. But also many world leaders who tried to use the crisis for political gain, not always successfully, and endangered the lives of millions with their denials, delayed responses, and their incompetent handling of the crisis. So no wonder that the 2020 Edelman Trust Survey, the Edelman Trust Barometer is an annual trust and credibility survey, and in their 10-country study on trust and the coronavirus, which came out in April, government leaders emerged as one of the least trusted sources of information alongside journalists and the news media. They are not trusted as well. Corporate executives did a little better and ended up in the middle of the ranking, and scientists, doctors, and health authorities were the most trusted sources of information. By the way, Austria was not among the surveyed countries, but Germany was. And in response to the question, which institutions can be most trusted to respond effectively and responsibly to the coronavirus crisis, corporations again did better than governments. Almost 2/3 of respondents indicated that they trusted their employers to handle the crisis well, whereas governments were evaluated more negatively. In fact, government leaders were seen as both incompetent and irresponsible in the handling of the crisis. So in the eyes of the public, business organizations did better than governments. And there is in fact evidence that business leaders deserve somewhat higher marks for, how they responded to the crisis. Certainly, there have also been some glaring failures of leadership and accountability on the part of chief executives of large corporations. An example is once again Uber, so the usual suspects. The Uber CEO's position on the coronavirus, as he repeatedly stated in interviews, is that Uber is not responsible for the health and safety of their drivers, which of course is the same as saying that Uber is not responsible for the health and safety of the customers. But despite these occasional instances of irresponsible practices on the part of corporations, it was encouraging to see that after the coronavirus broke out, businesses from all over the world were mobilizing to help in the fight against the pandemic. For example, Jack Ma, through his foundation donated, I think, over 1 million testing kits and 8 million face masks to be sent to African countries. Amazon established a COVID-19 fund and pledged to hire 90,000 more workers to deal with coronavirus demands. Now, to what extent these pledges are more than just window dressing is a bit difficult to tell, but what is clear is that there were companies that responded quickly and effectively and responsibly, including IKEA and Oracle, as we will in a moment hear from two of our panelists. I think I have 5 minutes left, at least I hope so. Then let me conclude my presentation by sharing some of the insights from my research into the COVID-19 crisis and responsible leadership. I've published several articles on the subject, some in English, some in German, and would be happy to share them if you're interested. Now, I set out in March, so early on in the crisis, to identify cases that illustrated effective and ineffective and responsible and irresponsible handling of the crisis, and discovered soon that the two, effective management and responsible leadership in a crisis, are not always the same, just as managing and leading are not always the same. Just to give one example, for me, one of the iconic moments of this pandemic was when sailors aboard the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt celebrated their commander, Captain Brett Crozier, after he was fired by his boss, the Navy secretary. Some of you may have read about it in the newspapers. Here's what happened. Crozier had requested that the majority of his crew be evacuated and quarantined after the virus broke out on his ship, and after his direct superiors denied his request for support and the virus continued to spread throughout the ship. At one point, I think there were 1,000 people infected. He sent a desperate email to other naval officers in the region asking for support and requested evacuation of the infected crew members. And the Navy secretary fired him for skipping the chain of command and contacting other naval officers for help, which was technically a breach of security, but was widely considered the right thing to do, also among military officers like this retired admiral in the US Navy. In other words, in the words of Warren Bennis, coming back to leadership, Captain Crozier hadn't done things right, at least not in the minds of his superiors. He had made a mistake, but he had done the right thing. Right? He had exhibited real leadership in the crisis. And from my analysis of this case and dozens of others involving political leaders, business leaders, military leaders, I distilled 6 key lessons learned from the COVID-19 crisis. One is that in times of crisis, leaders need to empower those working on the front lines and not punish mistakes. Missteps can happen when people have to make decisions under intense pressure and stress, as in the case of this Navy officer, but failing to act would have been much, much worse in this situation. Now, we don't have to have the time to discuss each of these points in detail, but I will conclude with one last point that I found striking. You know, when you look at these lessons learned, best practices for managing a crisis, this is pretty much the opposite of what all those autocratic government leaders we talked about earlier did, right? How they handled or mishandled the crisis. Autocrats do not empower those on the front lines. They want to control everything. They do not tolerate mistakes. They are constantly looking for scapegoats. They do not encourage and listen to dissenting voices. They surround themselves with, what is the term, English word for Arschkrieger? Sorry, yes men. And clearly, they do not show empathy, compassion, and concern for people. Quite the opposite. They, don't care much about others and see others only as a means to satisfy their own selfish needs and interests. And this is why they did such a terrible job handling the crisis, because this is not how you manage a crisis. I think that my time is up. I will stop here and pass on to Milda, but I would like to end on a more positive note, because the purpose of this WO Matters event is not to finger point and assign blame to specific leaders, although many would deserve it. The purpose is to highlight the many positive examples of responsible leadership during the crisis in a business context, obviously, but we also want to take this event as an opportunity to celebrate the many everyday leaders that emerged in the crisis, people who took responsibility, showed care and concern for others, and acted as role models. I'm thinking, for example, of the many people working in the healthcare sectors, doctors and nurses, and we invited one to join us tonight or this evening, and all the other essential workers who have provided critical services during this pandemic, because this is what responsible leadership is all about, right? Making a positive impact on people and society. Thank you for joining us here this evening, and I look forward to a thought-provoking discussion.
Thank you so much, Günther. We will now go into our panel discussion, where I'm sure we'll also touch upon some of the issues that Günther raised, but more from a practice perspective. Just a quick remark on the logistics. So if you're listening to us live on YouTube right now, and I see around 80 people are doing that, and if you'd like to pose a question to either the keynote speaker, to Günther, or to one of our panelists, feel free to do so in the chat at any moment. Depending on the time we have left at the end of the discussion, we'll see how many of those questions we can cover in the Q&A session, but you can post starting now. And now again, I'm delighted to welcome today's panelists. It's a pity, of course, that we cannot do this in person as a roundtable discussion on our university's campus. So thank you one more time, sincerely, for joining us virtually. And a very quick round of introductions in alphabetic order. I apologize for mispronouncing some of your names in advance, but as we were joking before this event, my last name is not the easiest for non-speakers of Lithuanian either. So I hope I have the right to, to accentuate incorrectly. So Karin Atjarova is Marketing Director at Computer Technology Corporation Oracle. She's based in Vienna, originally from Slovakia, and she is looking after the company's top customers across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Alpaslan Deliloglu, originally from Turkey, was living in Switzerland for several years, and now since September 2019 is leading IKEA Austria and living here with his wife and 2 kids. And I thought this was of interest at IKEA, that country managers are not only CEOs, but also CSOs, Chief Sustainability Officers. So that's a relevant fact in the light of our discussion tonight. And Wolfgang Höppler, thank you so much for joining us in complete last minute. Specialist in infectious diseases here in Vienna. And I think what says it all is that we just simply didn't know if you could even take part here because you are on duty. So we're delighted having you here today. Also not from the private sector, Marta Krumpeck, molecular biologist and environmental activist at Extinction Rebellion Austria. And last but not least, Lars Meidel. Lars is a leadership coach. He accompanies senior leaders in their thinking and decision-making process, placing focus on the emotional fortitude. And he lives between Vienna and Barcelona. And as a former environmental engineer, Lars, I think you also have a knack for sustainability matters, right? So I will start with the discussion right away, and I will ask the first question to Wolfgang because we're not sure if he doesn't need to get up and, and run out. And also, it goes without saying that as a medical doctor, you have been at the front lines of the corona battle. So I am very honored to ask you the first question, and also to thank you and your colleagues on behalf of our own team, as well as the audience, I'm sure. So I have a very simple question to begin with, because I think a lot of us are curious. Could you describe the workload and responsibilities that you as a physician have been taking on since the outbreak? And how has it differed from the times before the pandemic?
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me well? Excellent. Yeah, of course, the workload has been massive. It's been much heavier than usually because before we've never seen that many patients with just one disease, obviously. Even at the peak points of the flu season, for instance, we've never had the full department full only with flu patients, because this comparison was often made at the beginning of the pandemic when things weren't so clear yet. Plus, of course, all our private situations were quite difficult with school closures, for instance. I've got 2 kids at school, which and we had to teach in between, so to speak, during the first lockdown. Also, we're doing a lot of research now because we've been the main treatment center for COVID-19 in Vienna right from the start. And all these questions we had to ask. We have a very good cooperation with the virology department, because we've got these huge patient numbers. And yeah, so there are a lot of challenges, of course, but we've got an excellent team. We're quite motivated, I think. Sometimes a bit of pandemic fatigue is settling in, of course, but yeah, we're doing quite fine at the moment, I think.
Thank you. And, building up what you said, we have an excellent team. So in business scholarship and in teaching, a lot of times leadership is associated with the top level positions. And as Günther inferred, perhaps it's time to change that. So the corona crisis has shown that the change is driven a lot of times by teams or by everyday people. Maybe Wolfgang, if you have a minute still, could you share examples of what you believe has been kind of everyday leadership practice at the hospital? And it could be good stories of doctors, nurses, or other personnel. Anything memorable that comes to your mind?
I think it's very important to realize that you can only solve the problems together. We have an excellent head of department, but of course you can't take care of everything. So he had to delegate a lot of responsibilities. And yeah, I think it's very important that the hierarchies are not too steep, because nurses and doctors always have to work together. That's obvious. But especially during times of crisis, the cooperation is even more intense, because you can't simply rely on your superior all the time because he might not even be there. Yeah, cooperation is really an important keyword, I think.
I hope our students heard that. Thank you. I'll have a few more questions for you.
They're very important. They did help us a lot. And they're very important. I mean, they're still learning, but they supported us very much. And without them, especially during the first few weeks, we couldn't have done without them. So everyone is important.
So shout out to students as well. Thank you. I'll move on to Lars with a different context, though the world of business. So Lars, you work with senior executives, you coach leaders, and you hear firsthand about their concerns. So what have been the major pressing issues for your clients in regard to leading their organizations during the corona crisis? And I'm sure that many problems are company specific, but have you noticed any common trends? And also, have these challenges been mostly operational, related to the basic survival of business? Or are there also noticeable concerns for really strategic, disruptive, long-term topics and firms' responsibility toward the broader society? So that's a long question, but I'm sure you can take it.
Thank you, Milda. I take it in pieces. To your first question, if there's a common trend, I work dominantly with C-level leaders in the German-speaking world, and what I learned, there are common trends. Let's look to 3 dimensions. The first dimension is COVID as a health crisis with economic impact. The second dimension would be COVID as an accelerator and activator of transformation. And the third, and my topic with my clients, is COVID as a character test for leadership and resilience. To the first part, the COVID as a health crisis with economic impact, the trend is that most of my clients never before had to have expertise about general health topics with their employees. This came suddenly, and I must say it was amazingly well done and well handled by most of them to take care of the physical safety of their employees. So there was a clear trend. Whoever you ask, the first thing was to send people home, and if this is not possible, to make it secure to work. When it comes to the business model, I mean, there is not really a trend because, as you know, some business models put totally into question, like hospitality or sales store retailing, and others are growing exponentially. So for both of them, what is the trend is that customer needs changed dramatically. Now coming to the second part, Corona as an activator for transition. I mean, digitalization, IT strategies, my clients tell me what they planned for the next 5 to 6 years was realized in 6 months in these times. And when it comes to being an accelerator, it's a very tough time for leaders who made a career in a linear way, in a linear business, never having to deal with transition and disruption. Just think of work from home or work from anywhere. It's one thing to send people home, and it's the other thing to reconnect them. And now to my topic is leadership practices, and the character test. When you ask leaders, and I'm sure that the leaders in the call will agree, the first challenge that comes to mind was communication. You send people home, this went smoothly, you connect them maybe with a cable, you bring home PCs, but that's only the first thing. That's a long emergency dramatics, and this is emergency plan. This works, smoothly, especially in companies that, like the oil companies, energy companies, or pharmaceutical companies that are used to that, where it went even more smoothly. But establishing, the right cascade to communicate to your people, how often, with which contents, how do you connect them within each other, and how do you really understand their morale, their fears, and anxiety, and how get things done. This was the biggest and most pressing challenge of all my clients. The second is they had to think bigger and faster. If things move in 5 years, you can go with your business model. If things move in a second, you have to think big, to think fast. And this is very difficult for people with a limited cognitive flexibility. Time management, exhaustion. Most of my clients had to take care very well of their exhaustion level and their capacity to work 14, 15 hours in front of Zoom, in front of a video conferencing tool. They made hardly breaks. Some people worked around the hour in their home offices. So to balance yourself, to regain your strength, to have mindfulness routines became quite significant in these times. Then the other thing is how you show up as a leader. You could be introvert, extrovert, you could be a little bit more demanding or directive or participative. But in this crisis, you had to show up as a human being. You looked in the living rooms of your people, in the kitchens, you saw the children play behind. You could hardly hide. And how you show up when things are more transparent and there's more emotion and more empathy in the room, that was difficult for many of them, but the better communicators made a good job. Last but not least, CEOs learned from each other than never before. Peer networks were created in a way that have been unimaginably before. I was lucky enough to be invited by a management consultancy who invited Asian CEOs to explain European CEOs how they shut down and brought people back to work in the energy sector. So, because they were earlier in this wave. So we saw networking, peer networks and connection like never before. Second, or maybe last part of your question, this was the long-term, the purpose-driven part of leadership in these times. And I think, because of the time limitations, only one point. In last year, the US roundtable, 181 CEOs declared the end of the stakeholder and the arising of the shareholder and the arisement of the stakeholder. It was never more true than in the crisis that if you as a CEO, as a senior leader, focus only on profits and your entity of your business, you were doomed to fail. You had to deal with society overall. You had to talk about your supply chain, to your employees, to the customers, to the family of your employees, and to NGOs and the public. And there was no way around that. So there was not, it was not a theoretically topic that you look at the broader society to influence and to get your ticket to get the license to work in the marketplace. Yeah, I think these were my points.
I may get back to you to that purpose point later if we have time today. And I'm really glad that you brought up the peer networks among industry leaders, because I've also heard that from the practitioners that we work with on several research projects. And maybe we'll also get Alpaslan and Karin to contribute to that conversation. But first, I want to turn to you two as insiders of large business organizations with a different question. So Al, here at university in the sustainability courses we teach, we often get student presentations on IKEA, and they often present best practices of implementing sustainable development goals of the UN Agenda 2030. And what I believe our students, as well as broader audience, would be interested in hearing about today is whether, and if yes, how have you been able to carry on with these SDG efforts during the COVID-19? And it would be great if you could share a few concrete examples, whether here from Austria or anywhere else from the broader supply chain.
Thank you. Thank you for a great opportunity. It is amazing to be here listening from these leaders and opinion leaders. And I think I will lead this conversation with a lot of learnings. In IKEA, we are guided by our vision, which is making everyday life better for the many people. This vision is as old as the company itself, actually. And number of set values aligned with this vision helps us to focus on making the world a better place. One of the key value, people and planet positive, guides us, which aims to make the people's life better and also future of the planet. Why it is very important? Because it gives a direction to decision makers in the company, and also it gives a lot of resources to act remarkably. Some of the goals we set align with this direction given. By 2030, we will be carbon neutral. By 2030, we will be making a positive impact on many people in IKEA's value chain. Some of the tangible goals already achieved. We are genderly balanced organization in Austria, and we are paying equally already this year, which is set a goal for global IKEA to reach in 2022. This purposeful lead gives us direction and also resources. And also during the crisis time, It was our guidance. We set our agendas with setting the priorities during the crisis days. Number one was health and well-being of our people. And number two was being a responsible company. And number three was continuing our business. Aligned with this goals, right on the day when we heard first lockdown, we announced to our people that we would be paying their salaries full and no dismiss during the lockdown. It was quite a relief for our people, I can imagine. It was even earlier than government subsidies cleared out. During the lockdown, and since then, we have been introducing a number of different packages to support their physical and mental well-being, also their financial situations within the families. Aligned with what we have been doing with our people, remember, second priority was acting as a responsible company. As IKEA, we announced, we raised a fund for this emergency, which is around 36 million euro globally. And already 700,000 euro of this amount was spent in Austria in different needs with different organizations we are partnering with. And on top, I could say we never went for government subsidies, although in the first lockdown, we put half of our people into short work, which is around 4 million euro. When we realized our business is growing faster than we could imagine, we decided not to apply for this amount, that this amount could be used for the better purposes by the government. There are many things tangible. You were asking me to give some tangible examples. There are many things I could come up with. For the sake of the time, I will stop. But there is one thing I'm proud the most. During the first days of the lockdown, one of our coworkers from one of the stores called me and said, actually, we have quite a decent amount of medical masks in our warehouses. It was a necessary protocol from the previous crisis that we had to keep certain amount of masks. In those days, remember, everyone was asking and searching for masks. Even we didn't know how many masks we would need in coming days. So we donated 50,000 masks in the first week of crisis, but I'm not proud of because of we donated masks or number of masks we donated. I'm most proud our responsible caring approach embedded into entire organization. Even in the stores, one of our coworkers could call me and tell me that we should do this.
And that they have direct line to call you.
They send an email, but they could also call.
This is great. This is a great story. And Karin, now that we're on the same topic, so Oracle is a tech firm, which is different industry from IKEA, and I think you're headquartered in the US, if I'm not mistaken. I remember in May, I was talking to a friend of mine who is a nurse in a public hospital in Chicago, and it was actually from her that I heard that Oracle was donating software to collect and organize real-time medical data on COVID-19. And I also later learned about similar donations to hospitals and correct me if I'm wrong, I think in UK, Mexico, and Mongolia. But the reason, and this is what interests me in talking to you, the reason why I'm posing this question is because it seems to me that Oracle had stayed quite low-key about these efforts. So there wasn't much splash about the donations in the media. And I'd like to hear from your perspective then what drives the commitment toward the broader society at Oracle. And maybe you could share some also additional examples, similarly as Al did, about the social responsibility efforts that we may not even know because there's not much PR behind it. It's just being done.
Yeah, thank you, Milda. And thank you for the rest of the speakers and great keynote. So yeah, what I can say from the perspective as representing the Oracle company, so the commitment towards the broader society in Oracle is to help to save lives. And healthcare organizations, governments, and researchers all are working together in the fight against COVID-19, which which with the ultimate goal of saving lives. So over the last few months, we have seen hundreds of examples of how our customers, partners, and employees are making an impact during this crisis. And we has been actively engaged in the ongoing fights against COVID-19. And we are also actively helping government agencies and medical communities better understand and combat the coronavirus using modern technology capabilities. So of course, everyone's health and welfare are a priority, everyone's. So therefore, Oracle employees are working from home where possible, and we offer an employee assistance program where necessary. And this is what Lars also mentioned, that, yeah, of course, the big corporations, including Oracle and also other big players on the market, we send people back home and we gave them all these possibilities to be safe and continue the business. So we have extensive online collaboration capabilities to help ensure business continuity. And we are working tirelessly to help everyone stay safe, while at the same time, we are trying to continue to serve our clients. So we want our customers and partners to know that at this challenging time, they can count on us to support their business. And back to your question, Milda, which seems to be sensed by the broader audience, that perhaps Oracle stayed quite low about it with another big splash in media. Here I would say that it's not about praising the good things Oracle does, we just do them, exactly like you said. So if people follow us on the social media channels, they will see that we are engaged to help in the pandemic and how we are doing it. And perhaps to put a bit more light about what was announced, and we also mentioned a couple of examples. So part of the announced clinical trial system, which collects the data that proves the COVID-19 drugs and vaccines are both safe and effective. By the way, now in 2 weeks, which is much, much quicker than ever before. So the time is definitely the big asset. So Oracle donated therapeutic learning system to the US government. You also mentioned it, Milda, that allows physicians and patients to record the effectiveness of promising COVID-19 drug therapies. And by the way, the system is currently available to every physician in the United States. And you also mentioned Mongolia, Mexico. Yes, we help in the ongoing fight with COVID-19 in cooperation with Hulunbuir. I hope that I say it correctly, pronounce it correctly. Hulunbuir's People Hospital in Inner Mongolia, Mexican state of Querétaro, and also University of Bristol in UK. So, and on top of that, we also help in Australia by providing to immunology experts at Flinders University with the infrastructure and high performance computing resources needed to model the COVID-19 virus proteins. So I think that another part of your question was also to share perhaps additional Oracle social responsibility efforts with COVID-19. Yeah, so another great example that have been recently announced to address COVID-19 challenges is the Tony Blair Institute, who partnered with us to deliver cloud technology to digitize and unified national health data, starting with the management of vaccinations. So the Tony Blair Institute and Oracle have brought cloud technology to Africa to manage public health programs. Initially, Ghana, Rwanda, and Sierra Leone will use our new health management system to create electronic health records for their vaccination program for yellow fever, HP virus, polio, measles, and COVID-19 as soon as that vaccine is distributed to Africa. And we, Oracle, are in a discussion with Tony Blair Institute about more than 30 other countries in Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America that are evaluating using the same cloud system to manage their COVID-19 vaccinations program. And I think that another 2 examples that have been also shared on our social media is that we are helping healthcare workers. And there was one in Croatia where the Croatian government launched an automated advisor that reduced the burden and overextended caregivers by helping Croatians to self-diagnose if they might have COVID-19. And another one was in Spain, Another automated advisor was in Spain for the Red Cross, which helped frontline workers to do their jobs more effectively. So I hope that I put a bit more light.
Absolutely. Yeah. You did, thank you, because as I said, at least in my case, I only heard from the people who were actually on the receiving side of the donations first. I keep hearing the two themes, you know, purpose and peer networks and collaborating with other industry leaders. And I will go back to the latter one, but speaking of purpose, my next question goes to Marta. And Marta, you are an outsider at this table and proud to be so. You're a climate activist within a global environmental movement called Extinction Rebellion, which uses nonviolent civil disobedience acts to push governments to take more action toward the climate crisis. And if I may, I'll just very briefly share a photo from one of your last protests this past October. So can you okay me if you see it? So I'll let Marta share a little bit more inputs here, but this actually already leads to one of our audience members' questions, which is related to the climate crisis and how that may have been overshadowed by the Corona crisis. So we will go back to the exact question maybe at the end, but Marta, I would like to ask you, and I'll stop sharing the screen so we see you better.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Let me first correct something that I think Tatiana said in the opening. This crisis is not a singular event. We are on the verge of a permanent crisis because pandemics, climate disasters, ecological breakdown, and what they bring with it. For example, pandemics are greatly enhanced by warm, wet weather, which happens to be one of the consequences of the climate crisis, and so on and so on. So it will not be the last time humanity is facing a crisis. And on leadership within an organization like Extinction Rebellion, where there is no formal leadership, the absence of formal leadership does not mean that there are no decisions to be made. And if there are decisions to be made, someone has to make the decisions. So how do you actually do this in such a movement? As there are no formal hierarchies, you have to rely much more on the power of argument and of course on the shared purpose of the people within the movement, because we are all part of Extinction Rebellion because we want to avoid the worst. We want to avoid the worst of the breakdown of our climate, of the breakdown of ecosystems. And that's why so many people volunteer to do such incredible work within Extinction Rebellion. And because of this shared purpose, if you make a proposal that actually fits this purpose, and you can make clear how this proposal will help, then people will join, then people will contribute. There are working groups that have their own agendas, for example, media and messaging, for communication with the press, for setting up the media relations, for formulating texts ahead of actions, communication strategies. There are people working together on this. They're working together because they believe in the common goal. And how does one actually make decisions? Normally, if you have a good idea, the first thing is you ask some people that already know you, that already trust you, you share it around a bit, especially if it's something that's not fit for the general public, like some action idea for some disruptive civil disobedience, and you get some feedback. Maybe you get some additional ideas you can incorporate. Maybe people tell you, oh no, this is a bad idea because of this and this and this, and you see that, and okay, maybe it's really a bad idea. But if it's a good idea, you set up a working group. You ask for people to join this working group. If there are decisions to be made that affect people, that affect the entire movement, or that affect people outside of the working group, you ask for feedback. And if there is nothing serious, if there are no serious objections, you can also make the decision. There's no need to wait for a plenum or something like that. If you get the impression that basically everyone is on board with this or has no serious objections, you can actually make the decision, and you can then communicate the decision, because making the decision is only one part. Once the decision is made, you also have to communicate it to everyone else. Nothing major is planned for this or that date. In the coronavirus pandemic, we faced a series of tough decisions because we had a pre-planned wave of actions for May, which was called off when the corona crisis escalated because of several reasons. One of them was that we couldn't work out a working prevention concept in that short time, and we didn't want to take any risks on spreading the coronavirus. But when conditions improved in summer, someone had an idea to make a rebellion wave, a wave of actions in September, October. And this person shared this idea around, and others commented and gave feedback. And it was quickly established that many people within the movement were eager to go into action once again. So we set up working groups to prepare. We set up a working group to think about the coronavirus pandemic and how to corona-proof the actions. And from that point on, we went into full planning mode, basically. Yeah. And as you can see, it was a huge success, because everything you could see on this picture, the structures built, the elephants, the flags, everything was built by separate teams who were all bound together by this shared vision of what we wanted to achieve.
I'll share a picture just one more time. And now that you have touched upon this already briefly, could you maybe specify what kind of proofs and signs of responsibility you took for this October event? So what specific steps did you take to ensure social distancing? Because after all, your movement, the core of it is to attract as many people as possible, which is ironic given the current situation.
Yes, that's quite a challenge, because the basic concept is to organize mass civil disobedience, which means you get as many people as possible together in one place and you disrupt something there in order to get the attention you need, because other protests are just ignored. Getting many people together in one place is a huge challenge because of COVID, because getting many people together in one place also helps COVID to spread. So first of all, outdoor actions are inherently safer than indoor actions, because there is much air circulation, there is less danger of spreading the virus. Still, additional precautions had to be taken. So people were generally advised to stay apart from each other if not absolutely necessary. So keep 1 meter of distance, preferably more. Wear masks, especially when you cannot keep your distance to each other, for example, in a shared action. We also organized some disinfectant and handed out, I think, 50 flasks of disinfectant, these small hand dispersers, so that every affinity group going into action somewhere had some disinfectant with them. We handed out masks for people who might probably get in touch with the police, for example, because they were locked onto something. They used FFP2 masks, which are safer, both to keep themselves safe and also to keep the policemen and policewomen interacting with them safe. And the challenge was basically to get everything set up, to work out a corona concept, to think about contact tracing within a movement where people might probably prefer not to have their name on a list somewhere. So we thought about so we thought about making the list so only the people working together within one affinity group could share their contact data, so that if someone had a health problem, COVID related, then all the others that were in touch with this person would be informed. There was also a first aid team consisting of doctors, nurses, other medical professionals on site who took care of coronavirus measures and other health issues. So basically, we prepared as good as we could, and it worked because we didn't have any COVID cases, and we also didn't have any suspected cases at all, actually.
Thank you. And I mean, this is incredible, again, given that it's a leader-less organization having to organize leadership-based actions, right? The one thing that, Marta, you were talking about is not losing purpose, even in these difficult times, not losing it out of sight. And I'd like to ask Lars, based on your expertise, I imagine many executives would, in theory, also like to build their leadership around the purpose-driven vision. But in practice, is it possible to hold on to that purpose when the crisis like this one, completely unexpected one, hits?
Yeah. Oh, good. Now I can build on everything that was said already by the outstanding speakers. Well, I like this joke. I mean, what's a purpose-driven leader? I mean, some people enter a room and people have the feeling the light goes on, and other people enter the room and most people feel that the light goes off. And I think purpose-driven leaders are the ones where the light should go on. And how are they doing that? They normally share a long-term view. Short-termism is one of these diseases of the way we live capitalism right now. And this long-term view is something that I think people can recognize. The second thing is social inclusion. As long as you believe it's us with them, it's the employees with the management, it's the supply chain with my production, you won't call yourself a purpose-driven leader. The third point is man with nature. If you believe this is a formula that still works, you might not call yourself a purpose-driven leader. You promote sustainable practices as a personal role model. And last but not least, my clients, there's some of them are respectful and others show sometimes toxic behaviors. And I think purpose-driven leaders try to have so much self-awareness to avoid toxic behaviors. And now, to your question, if this applies in a crisis when there is anxiety, this is a very strange question. And I only can put it into the context that we live in a world where what science knows is not necessarily what business does. And in science, we know that when you have the capability to engage human beings in your corporate activities, you have won. Because otherwise, you pay a dead body in your room. And in a world where we have much more higher skilled people, because the rest will be automated, you should not use fear strategies, and especially not in a crisis, to lead your people. Because fear strategies, they seem like people run faster, people work harder, they stay longer in the office, especially longer than the boss. But in reality, they only hide and they protect themselves. And this is, so science knows that. So the question, if you should be a purpose-driven leader in a crisis, it's a very strange question, because how can you dare not to engage your people when you need them most, when they are disconnected from headquarters, when they have to take action at the client front without any guidance, without any hierarchy and command chain. And therefore, the answer to your question is yes. It's if you don't have this moral compass, because purpose-driven leaders influence very much the corporate culture. If this culture doesn't guide your people to do the right things in the right moment, you do have quite a problem in a crisis most of the times. Last but not least, I've been a headhunter, executive search consultant for 10 years. This profession, they will have to look for different people now. And this is also what we learned. And to be a purpose-driven leader and to be more explicit, to have empathy and engagement, to communicate well, to be a complex problem solver, show emotional intelligence and cognitive flexibility, there is no experience in this list. There is no gray hair. There is no, I know how these things done here in the last 20 years. So we have to hire people that, at least in the senior levels, and my colleagues in the distinguished headhunting companies do start doing that on the base of potential, on the base of their character traits and their humility, and of their traits of competencies, of course. And I think we will see a mainstream of leaders after this crisis in the new normal that use less fear strategies and more purpose-driven strategies.
Thank you. Thank you for reformulating it from the question to a statement, which I agree with. And in that case, I'll build on this and I'll ask Alp-Aslan, so to you, a question not about IKEA as a company, but more about exactly your personal experiences of being in a leadership position in such a large, globally spanning organization. So what challenges have you personally faced during and because of COVID-19, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, I think quite similar with what Lars coming up with. First of all, this was a crisis, not only belonged to my company or my business area or my country. It's a crisis all over the world. And also not only in businesses, it's a crisis at home as well. Kids were not at school and we had a lot of trade outside and there were no place to run and hide. That was the most probably first thing about the crisis. And also the second thing, we didn't have much of people around who has proven business cases how to act in this crisis because it was an extraordinary crisis situation. At time like this, obviously, it was even more important than having finding your own way. There are a number of things came out during reflections of crisis days, still not over. Yet we talk like it is over, but still ongoing. First of all, importance of the resilience. I think importance of the resilience as company, it was known, the financial resilience of a company to survive in any crisis. And obviously ahead of us, there are more crises alarming due to the climate change. Importance of the financial resilience, but also companies itself could be resilient only through its people. Importance of the leaders' resilience, right? But also those leaders who we are needs to be resilient more than ever. But importance of building the resilience through, you were, Lars, giving an example, not fearful leadership, not building on the fears, but as an individual, not letting yourself towards fears, but relying on people around and relying on the values you are standing on, and also constantly feeding yourself with a positive outlook and hope. Building hope for yourself as a leader, as an individual, and spreading out the hope to the inner circle and affecting many more people, because hope is as contagious as the virus itself. During the days, what we learned against the virus, the best, most probably immune was hope. But also with this, I also learned as an individual and as also leader, importance of the communication. During the days, we have a corporate communication channels, quite professional. But it was too professional even. We had to be with people. During the days, we, with the management team, visited all units, spent time with our people. And also after the lockdown, visited our units and listened their frustrations. But also this was also a way to humanize ourselves, showing our vulnerability, and also hearing from them how important the communication was for them during the days. And in the communication, sharing the hope we have, and also underlining solidarity was our kind of recipes to survive the days. But also it was my individual, most probably, recipe. Most probably the business life and also private life came so close to each other, it was undistinguishable anymore. Then your individual, your personality was also affecting the leadership fully. And the days you are living as leader were definitely affecting the daily life. That was quite a great learning, and this learning is still continuing. If I summarize this importance of resilience as company, as also individual, investing into, importance of communication, open, transparent human communication, and last but not least, leading in unknown, the most important, like walking in fog, having a compass on hand, not giving up the direction. Crises like this, our purpose, our vision, our values could be our compass. In any dilemma, any hard decision could help us to come to a point. These were the most probably, as a leader and as an individual, my learnings out of these days.
Thank you. I will hand over to the audience for their questions very soon. So please feel free to keep posting. I see some of them coming up in the chat. But because Al, you mentioned communication, I'd also like to ask Karin and Marta very briefly communication-related questions. So Karin, from your area of expertise, what are the most responsible modes of corporate communications in times like this of crisis? And what helps to really add the human touch when reaching out, whether externally or internally?
Yeah, so thank you, Milda. I would say that perhaps we'll take it from going a bit in the past. So we in Oracle went through a big transformational change, I think 1.5 years ago. And the bigger company you are, the harder it is to transform successfully. And our leaders have turned business into customer service champions. And this change began with a new mission statement written by our founder, Larry Ellison, that our mission is to help people see data in a new ways, discover insights, and unlock endless possibilities. So all of these changes for such a big company as Oracle is, with approximately 140,000 employees, helped all of us in the current crisis because our employees and clients are dealing with the transformational change every day. So on the other hand, our customers and partners understood that digital transformation is not a transformation anymore, but became a digital reality. And particularly in the times of crisis, customers, partners, or employees, so either you have an internal or external type of communication. So these interactions with a company can trigger an immediate and effect sense of trust and loyalty. So therefore, an open, honest, and early enough, transparent and regular communication is a necessity. So I would say that overall, in the times of crisis, we in Oracle kept in mind the right communication approaches as the tone. We have to think transparency, trust, confidence, and empathy, and not business as usual. Also, we kept in mind that people read differently based on the medium that they are using. Also, audience is another big thing. So we wrote for our audience, and we had in mind these type of questions like, what is the most important information for my specific audience? What is their emotional context? Or why am I communicating with them? And or what are they feeling because of what is going on around them, etc., etc. And how we should deliver the communication, email, video, social media, banner, etc. So all of these things are very important within the times of crisis. And also frequency. Things are changing with the blink of an eye, so we communicate frequently and with relevance. And most important, the fourth part is listening. So we have variety of social media monitoring tools that provide insight into how audience segments are reacting to a crisis and our response to it. So we monitor what customers are talking about, what they are reading about, and what they are clicking on, which is the key to staying in touch and know their sentiment. And from the, let's say that from the top leadership team. So our team is meeting continuously to assess and appropriately respond to the crisis as it evolves. And in Austria, we have an excellent, and I would dare to say, from my point of view, one of the best country communication management approach led by our country leader, Mr. Martin Winkler, and his leadership team. So those of us based in Austria who have an international roles like myself and a broad management line, we got an allocated local manager to be regularly in contact with us and help us with any concerns, problems, or anxiety at any time. So we feel much safe about it. And perhaps as the end of my input, I would like to use a quote that is moving and inspiring, especially in the times of crisis. A quote from Mrs. Maya Angelou, who was an American poet and civil rights activist. So maybe you know already this quote, but if not, I'm happy to quote this lady. So people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So
beautiful. Thank you, Karen. I did not know the quote. Thank you. And Marta, I will ask you, but maybe very briefly, so we can go into the audience questions, but actually this is based on one of the questions I already see in the chat. So, you know, thinking that a lot of our listeners or those who watch this offline later are business students, are our students, and I assume many of them may be very concerned about the climate crisis, but perhaps do not feel like engaging in civil disobedience, or it may appear risky or just not their thing. So what other ways of communicating their concerns could you recommend to them if they're not willing to go on the street and yet they study in the fields that could be influential in the future?
I think one of the main parts is to listen to the science and to get the facts. Look at the carbon emissions curve, look at the temperature data, and you can see how sharply those are rising. We have temperatures of, on average, 6 degrees above average in the Arctic. The Arctic was on fire this summer. Forests were burning that never burned before because of this climate crisis. The ice is breaking down. So you have to look at the data and you have to look at how long these things have been known. There was a scientist warning to humanity in 1992, signed by over 100 Nobel laureates. So basically the who's who of science signed a warning to humanity. What happened? Nothing. Everything continued on business as usual. Emissions kept rising. Destruction of nature kept increasing, and there's still no change at all 5 years after the Paris Agreement. Emissions have still gone up, not down. So the question is, what does this lead us into? And it leads us into a world that will be 3 degrees, 4 degrees, maybe even more than 4 degrees hotter than today because of feedback loops in the climate system. Melting ice reflects less sunlight back into space. Pouring permafrost releases greenhouse gases, and so on, and so on, and so on. So the question is, can we even stop it at the moment right now? And what do we have to do in order to stop it? And what world will we pass on to our children and possibly our grandchildren if we don't act now? So this is my key motivation for taking such drastic action. The extremely drastic data and the simple fact that everything else has demonstrably not worked.
And you yourself are now also finalizing your studies, correct? So you
yes, this is correct. I'm working on a diploma thesis.
Yes. I'm not sure if Wolfgang is with us or not. So I will not bother him with one more question. I will lead to the audience questions now, but I'll also try to stick to the time limitations. So I will merge two of them in a way, because two of our listeners asked also climate crisis related questions. And one of them was for the corporate speakers. So I guess for Al and Karen, if you could share your personal opinions, if the movements like the Extinction Rebellion or Fridays for Future have affected, or if you felt the pressure because of these movements, and if you could simply share any of your connections to the civil society movements and your CSR programs. So if I'm paraphrasing the two questions into one correctly this way, perhaps Al, if you'd like to give it a go.
Quickly reflecting on the question, but I cannot say we are affected, but we are supporting. Because what we believe, we are aware of the importance of the climate change, and we know this is our last decade to act on. And we aim to raise our voice and also advocate this and inspire, enable many people. And any activities in this direction have us in their side full force.
Mm-hmm. And Karen, I'm not sure if that's a relevant question for you as well, or if you'd like to just add your personal opinion. The relationship between civil movements generally and the corporate social responsibility at Oracle.
So I think that I would perhaps take it from the part that definitely we know that something is going on with our planet, right? And as the same way that we are supporting healthcare organizations to fight against COVID-19, I do suppose that we are also helping researchers and scientists in various type of data collection that can help them to digitize and give them the proper technology capabilities. So I would say that that we support them.
Thank you. And I will not dig more into this because I only have a few more minutes left. And we said we would talk about responsibility in a broad sense today. So feel free, if anybody has questions, to contact us after the discussion. You can look us up at star@VU-Vienna, and we'd be happy to continue this more specific conversation. But I wanted, before I wrap up, to ask every one of you actually what recommendations you would have for us, everyday people, based on your recent experiences. If you could just sum that up in one sentence of, you know, what I and everyone around me could do tomorrow to make things just a little bit better, even though they're not at the high leadership positions the way you are, or not being part of a team like Marta is. So what lessons could we learn from all of you personally that we could share with our students or our families starting tomorrow? And anyone is welcome to take the floor. Maybe Lars, you could start, but I will just ask to keep it very short.
You need to unmute yourself.
Oh.
One sentence is a tough task. But I would say, people only can lead other people. People can only live their life in a good way to contribute whatever they do on each level when they not stay strangers to themselves. I think the thing that COVID showed us that it's one of the biggest adventures in later age to discover who you are, your patterns, your self-awareness, increase your self-awareness. Leaders need that the most, but I think everybody can handle a crisis better if we see that not as a deficiency, but as a normality.
Thank you. Right. Perhaps Karin?
Yeah, thank you. I think that first, let's start with ourselves, because we are the small pieces, small things in this beautiful planet. But I would just repeat myself what I said, and again, quote this lovely lady, Maya Angelou, this American poet and civil rights activist, because I think that from my point of view, she's right. So we always need to think how you will make people feel. So give them, yeah, okay.
And perhaps Al Paslan?
Yeah, I think I have been repeating a couple of times how important to have values as compass. As individuals, it is also extremely important to reflect on, learn and understand what are the values, also speak to us who we are, and finding our own vision, our own values, and also finding their matches as companies, as organizations, as other people, makes things right. Creates the magic moment when values matching to each other, when vision matching to each other. And on top, what I could say for everyone, which I believe definitely works for me, love what you do and also do what you love. I think this could also go hand in hand.
That sounds a lot like Confucius, right? Find a job you love and you will not have to work. Wonderful. And Marta and Günther, I may ask you the same question as well as a one takeaway message.
Try to make the world a better place, or at least avoid making it worse. Think long term, think of your children, think of your grandchildren and what world you leave behind for them.
This is a wonderful advice. Yes. And Günther?
I mean, what I personally took away from our excellent panelists is, this COVID-19 pandemic has been a horrible, horrible experience for everyone, has taken a huge human toll, and there's nothing positive about that. But what I heard from, many panelists is, it can also be an excellent training ground for leaders and for future leaders. And I'm saying that because you mentioned, Milda, that many students are actually listening. When you think about the key qualities that leaders must possess, creating a sense of shared purpose and direction, being led by your own moral compass, exhibiting empathy, developing social sensibility, that's all things that are tested in a crisis situation and that you can practice. So take it as an opportunity to reflect on your own moral values, right? And about your strengths and weaknesses that you have as a potential future leader, and try to practice them. Use the crisis as a training ground.
Thank you. And I would ask Wolfgang, but I believe he is, instead of giving us an advice, actually is doing it, is leading by example because he's at work.
Actually, I'm back.
Are you back? So Wolfgang, what could we tell our students and the future leaders? How could we make them help you better, and your team?
I'm sorry I had to leave in the meantime. I think it would be great if we continued listening to science and to scientists, because the next catastrophes are obviously right around the corner, like the climate catastrophe, and the next pandemic is going to come sooner or later too, of course. And yeah, there's a lot of good advice around the corner. You just have to listen to it, I think.
The information is there, just listen. Thank you so much to all of you. I will not pose any more questions, even though the chat discussion may continue going on. I will just note that one of the listeners said the crisis has required far more leadership today than in the normal calm sea of a normal day-to-day business. And I think our discussion illustrates this phrase just as well. The most difficult thing for an academic like me is to end events on time, but I will try to be responsible here because you also all need to go back to your families. It is late evening here in Vienna in the middle of the week. I'd like to thank you all once again, all of you panelists, also the WU Vienna's event and TV live streaming team who are right now behind the scenes. So Manuela, Johannes, and Florian and others, and of course the audience. There's nothing more that I'd like to do now than invite everybody for a post-event snacks and informal conversation, but that will have to wait until at least 2021, I believe. So again, thank you for joining us, and please everyone stay healthy.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All the best.